In the course of episode 5 for Phantasy Star Online 2, we get introduced to a number of unique characters that some people might be quite familiar with if they have played the previous Phantasy Star games, especially ones which are considered to be the original Phantasy Star series. Now in this video, we are going to take a look at one of these characters that's been introduced in episode 5 that can be considered quite historic because of her role throughout the entirety of the Phantasy Star series. Let's go ahead and take a look. Hey everyone, KoraPinoyX here once again, back with another PSO2 video, and today we're just gonna do a little bit of a history lesson regarding one of the key characters introduced in episode 5, which is Alis Landale. This is a character introduced in episode 5 as a Sword Maiden, but for those of you who have never played the original Phantasy Star games, Alis is actually a lot more important than just a Sword Maiden throughout the Phantasy Star series. Now before I go ahead and get started, we are going to be going through episode 5's storyline here, so this is your spoiler warning. If you want to go ahead and do the storyline of the game as of right now, I've gone ahead and put a link in the description below for the PSO2 website so you can go ahead and check the game out for yourself and catch up to episode 5 of the storyline in PSO2. Past this point, I can only assume that you're either caught up with the story or you're okay with spoilers. So we're gonna go ahead and take a look at Alis Landale's character throughout the entirety of the Phantasy Star series and PSO2. So to get us started in understanding Alis's history throughout the course of Phantasy Star, let's just get a general overview as to who she really is throughout the course of the series. In PSO2, she is introduced as the Sword Maiden of Cuento, and her only real purpose, at least at the beginning, is taking on the Crimson Fellworm, slaying the dragon, and sealing its power away. That was pretty much it. However, as we go through closer to the end of episode 5, her character becomes vital in taking on not just an army of supernaturals, but an army being spawned by Elmir, the current personification of Dark Falls, during the Omega Universe storyline. So this is very important to her character because of the fact that in the original games, not only is she a heroine of the original game, she is the main protagonist. She is the one that takes on all of this adventure across Algo in order to ultimately take down the very first incarnation of Dark Falls. Her role in PSO2 has been reduced slightly because we're now the protagonist here, which is our character, but for the most part, her role here in PSO2's episode 5 are actually reminiscent to what happened in the original games if it involves Alis in any way, shape, or form. So what are the events in episode 5 that get reflected upon based on Alis's adventure in Algo from the original games? So the first event in Alis's life that gets heavily reflected upon in PSO2 based on the events of the original game is the fact that she is involved in taking down a tyrannical king. In the original games, the reason that she was mostly doing this was because of vengeance. She wanted to take revenge on King Lashik, the tyrant king back then, because of the fact that he sent out his army to murder her brother. So this is one of the key things that really motivated her back in the day. The fact that her brother was murdered by a tyrant king, so she wanted to take him down. However, in Phantasy Star Online 2, despite the fact that she was taking down a tyrant king, the reason is very different. This is because the King of Cuento, which is King Lutz, is actually her uncle, and her uncle is going through a mental instability. He's becoming more and more corrupt due to the effects of the ephemera. So she involves herself with the revolutionary army in taking down King Lutz. Even though the reasoning is different, the results are ultimately the same. Both scenarios, Alis helps in dethroning a king, a tyrant king at that. So the next set of events involving Alis in PSO2 is the one where she finally takes on the Crimson Fellworm and utilizing her Laconium sword. Now this is very interesting. In the original game, the Laconian sword, the original name for this weapon, was actually a weapon for Alis that is considered to be the best in the game. This weapon can only be gained by defeating a red dragon in the Lost Island dungeon. So you had to defeat the red dragon first before you gained access to this weapon. In PSO2, however, this is vastly different. Because Alis already has access to the weapon in the game, she actually can't use it unless she takes on the Crimson Fellworm and sealing its powers away. After that, her purpose is fulfilled and she can't draw the sword properly again until a greater purpose is to be fulfilled. So this is one of the key fascinating facts about the Crimson Fellworm and the Laconium sword altogether. Tied together in the original game and in PSO2, Sega did an amazing job in doing that thing again, but making it a major event in the storyline of Episode 5. And of course, finally, with regards to Alis Landale, she is involved in taking on the Dark Falls in PSO2 Episode 5, much like that of her role in the original game. The key difference here is that because we're no longer in control of Alis Landale during Episode 5's storyline, we instead have her as an ally who would help us take on an army of supernaturals in order to rescue Harriet from the clutches of Dark Falls Elmir, the current iteration of the Profound Darkness in Omega. This is very interesting because even though she's not directly involved in taking on Dark Falls in comparison to her role in the original game where she directly fights the Dark Falls, in PSO2 Episode 5 her role is much more major, closer to the end of the game, really showing you how Sega really wants Alis to be part of that spotlight with taking on Dark Falls and the Profound Darkness during the events of Omega. All in all, the combination of taking down a tyrannical king, taking on a red dragon, and of course, taking on the army of Dark Falls really shows how Alis's character has been reflected upon in PSO2 Episode 5 when comparing it to the original story of Alis in the original Phantasy Star game. And that is pretty much the little history lesson that we have in regards to Alis Landale as of right now within the Phantasy Star series from the original game all the way up to Phantasy Star Online 2. What do you think about this scenario of Sega utilizing the original characters from the original games in PSO2 and possibly PSO2 New Genesis? Let us know in the comments below what you think about these characters being utilized by Sega once again throughout the course of the Phantasy Star series. And with all of that being said, if you enjoyed these videos, please consider leaving a like on the video itself and subscribing to the channel as well as hitting that bell icon so you can go ahead and catch up on any future Phantasy Star Online 2 content that I might be doing or any other games that I might be playing in future. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this video, thanks ever so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Onward and upward.